it's actually pretty easy. You don't always have to take the shoes off. You don't
Yeah.
always have to go into the super deep pronation, supination stuff that we've spoken about before. And I think maybe we've spoken about on podcasts before. You can do that, but you don't have to. Even just doing some of the overcoming isometrics where the heel is off the floor a little bit. We use it with all our healthy athletes. It works really well. Doing Bulgarian split squats where you take the front heel off the floor a tiny, tiny bit.
That was David Grey, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. It's great to have David Grey back on the show this week. David is the founder of David Grey Rehab. He works with clients from all walks of life, including a number of high-level and professional athletes. David is an expansive thinker, and he blends many elements of human movement together in a practical way that we can all resonate with in our own training and rehab processes. On the show today, David will be talking about various aspects of foot and lower leg training. He'll be touching on isometrics, especially the high-intensity versions related to the foot and lower leg. David also gets into concepts of loading and intensity in the rehab space. This and much more on the show. It was great having David back on. Excited to get the episode going. Let's get to 442 here with David Grey. David, it's great to have you back on the show, man. I know a lot has changed for you in the last couple of years. And one of the things I actually wanted to talk to you about, though, that I don't think we dug into before was you used to have Achilles issues, like big time. And I think that was a big impetus for you in searching out solutions and answers. And obviously you have a course and a program on these things out. But what was your own history in the Achilles and feet and lower legs, and how did you work through that?
Hey Joel, great to be back. You were my first ever podcast that I appeared on as a guest, so pretty cool to swing back around. I don't know how many years ago that was now. My Achilles, I'm like a perfect case study of someone who did lots of stupid things. Actually, in life, not just with my Achilles, but in life. But so I had a very, very bad patellar tendinopathy when I was playing a lot of sport, Irish sport, Gaelic football, hurling, at a pretty decent level. And I had a really bad patellar tendinopathy. And that, I think, was probably one of the main causes of me then developing a very nasty Achilles tendinopathy on that same side, because I don't think there's ever one thing, but I just didn't want to bend my knee much anymore on that side. So I think that I was just probably trying to get much more return from my ankle from every single movement that I did. And whether that was a cause or not, I think it was. And I ended up developing a really bad Achilles tendinopathy. And then I ended up getting it maybe on the other side as well. And it used to switch a little bit, or it would just be both. And it was really bad. And I was trying to get through it. And I was trying to do a lot of things to get through it. And I remember one season, my first season that I got that, I actually just went into a local sports shop and they did like a gait scanner where you walk on the treadmill and they tell you and everyone else that's ever been in, like, you're an overpronator and here's the insoles that you need. And they gave me a pair of insoles and they said to me, it was quite a severe insole at the time, actually. It was an orthotic that they built in the shop, supposedly for my foot. But looking back, it was just very hot on my foot for a minute and then I had an orthotic. But actually, the funny thing was that helped me a lot. My Achilles tendinopathy pretty much went away immediately. And this is not me trying to sell orthotics or telling anyone listening to buy orthotics, but maybe they will help. I'm a fan of trying things, right? And just trying. So that did help me, but that was the first in a long line of things that helped me just enough to keep me screwed for a long time. So that helped me. Then my Achilles tendinopathy came back in the next season. That didn't help me anymore. Tried another set of orthotics. That didn't help me. tried a lot of calf kind of strengthening work and stretching work, and that used to help me a little bit. And I did a lot of things that were able to provide an analgesic effect, number one, which looking back, actually anything will provide an analgesic effect pretty much. If you just, a warm-up effect will provide an analgesic effect. And this is a huge trap now that I see clients falling into, is they fall in love with the analgesic effect. I know a couple of exercises that will help me feel, especially with a tendinopathy, that would help me feel just good enough to get through the session. And I always fall back to those, and there's never any progressive overload with those, or you never push hard enough to really cause any adaptations. You're always just getting this analgesic effect, and it's a number one biggest trap with a tendinopathy is relying on that. You need to separate out, this is for analgesic effect before my session, and this is separate to that. I am doing these exercises to get stronger or to improve whatever other qualities I need. So the orthotic was good. Some kind of lighter yielding isometrics were quite helpful at certain points. A little bit of calf strengthening was quite helpful. One thing that helped me quite a lot was working on my foot movement, my heel bone, which is something that I think you and I worked on together, Joel, when we first met, was just improving that pronation and supination, that heel eversion, inversion, and opening up that midfoot. Why that helped, I don't know, to be honest. It's something that I still do a lot of to this day with basically any of our foot and lower leg clients. I will work a lot with how their foot moves, not because a pronated foot or a supinated foot is a better foot, just because I would like, if you have joints, I would like them to be able to move. And they don't have to be able to move a lot, but just to be able to move a little bit at least. And it's not this thing that you see in the barefoot movement online and stuff about how your feet have to be natural and your toes have to be spread and all of this stuff. Not at all. Some of the best world-class sprinters that I've been lucky enough to work with have the most mushed up feet, super flat, super, super stiff. But I've still done a little bit of work with those people where we've just tried to get a little bit of motion back into the foot. And does that help them get faster? I don't think so. But usually if they're with me because they have a problem. They have an Achilles problem, or they're getting repeat stress fractures, some kind of impingement or toe problems or something. So in plantar fascia problems. So in all of those instances, I would like to see just the foot being able to move a little bit more. So that was something that helped me quite a bit, opening up the foot and just loading more through the midfoot. And then I'm a classic case. A few years later, I actually tore my Achilles, which I'm not sure if you know about. So I tore my Achilles, not a full rupture, but not a good tear. And I was the classic case for someone who might tear their Achilles tendon. I had stopped playing sport for a few years. So I wasn't running and jumping. I was overweight. I was deconditioned. I'd lost a decent bit of muscle mass at the time. And then I went back playing sport. And my coach or my manager had asked me to come back to play at the same level that I was playing at before. And I had told him, I'm going to need probably at least 12 weeks to get into a condition where I can play. Not even a condition where I'm going to be anywhere near as effective as I was before, just where I feel like I could play and be safe to play. And I went to one training session, went to a second training session, went to a third training session that week. And then he said, we have a game this weekend. Will you play? And I said, yeah. And that's where I tore my Achilles. And literally, I tore my Achilles. I was on the pitch and I was just like, I'm an idiot. Like, I was asking for this. It was clearly going to be a lot of pathology in that Achilles for years and years and years of a tendinopathy. That's 100% going to be there if you scan my Achilles before that game. There is, if you did a scan of my body from when I was 4 or 5 years prior to this, you would have seen that I had lost muscle in my calves, my quads, my blah, blah, blah. I was just deconditioned. And I tore my Achilles. And I think that was that was just that was nothing to do with my training at the time, or like this how I moved or my biomechanics or anything like that. I just was not ready to play the sport that I was trying to do. So I guess that was my journey, and I just how I work with clients now is basically I always put through a filter of like just to do things that I didn't do back then. Just do the opposite of what I did.
Do the opposite.
Yeah, and that usually works pretty well.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's an interesting way. Sometimes I see that in like the stock market. It's like, Kramer, the stock picker. There's like the anti-Kramer index. Like whatever this guy picks, pick the opposite. So
yeah,
maybe.
Do you follow there's a guy called Peter Levels. Do you follow him on Twitter?
I don't know.
He's like a young digital nomad, but he's a really smart guy. Like he has several smaller companies and stuff. And he has an index fund that he created himself, or you can just kind of follow the stocks that he picks, and he calls it a deadlift ETF. And he only buys the stocks of companies that the CEO/founder, if the CEO/founder deadlifts, he buys that. he buys that stock, and that ETF is up like hundreds of % over the last few years, and he puts it down to them just being someone who lifts weights.
Hey, there's something too. I actually wrote that down, so after this podcast, I'm definitely going to check that out. It's an interesting, different way of thinking too. Of maybe all investing is going to start with like, all right, what are the habits of the CEOs? The physical habits.
Yep,
that's awesome. You mentioned too. Well, I do think it's funny. It's like all these programs came out of the core of do the opposite of what I did, and now it becomes that. That's I'm sure though. I mean, it is the personal experience hits home the hardest. It's like, oh, I should have done this, and you mentioned even orthotics too. Like you said, it's like it can help you for a while, but it makes you wonder. And I have seen people who, and I've heard plenty of stories where it's like I was in pain and this orthotic stacked up perfectly, and it's like So yeah, it is an interesting balance to look at that over time.
There is those things. You'll always find stories from someone who got an orthotic and their pain went away, did whatever type of manual therapy that everyone says doesn't really work, and oh well, my friend did it and their pain went away, or several other things. And you know what? Honestly, all of that stuff can work, but or went to one of these funny systems like these gurus in the industry, and they were able to help them when no one else could. But what I try and focus on with clients is you can't focus on the 1% of the people that you would be a really bad coach if you focused on the 1% of the person that this might help 1% of the clients or 0.1%. You have to do the things that are predictable and repeatable. And predictable means I can do this with a lot of people. It doesn't mean that it's going to help all of these people, but it means if I train calf strength, I know that their calf is going to get stronger. If I train plyometrics, I know that they're going to improve at plyometrics. Some will improve fast, some will improve slow, but they're likely going to improve at that thing. If I train foot mobility, ankle mobility, they're going to improve at that. But if I give them an orthotic, will it help them? I have no idea. Mm-hmm. If they go for manual therapy, will it help them? I have no idea. So my thing is always try and do the things that are predictable and repeatable, and that will usually stack up over time.
Yeah, for sure. It's even too in thinking about all the different ways to train people, and when things can get complicated, like having at least those main big rocks that'll help the biggest part of the bell curve, and you can use that as a basis, and it's always a great place to start. I do want to ask you too, before we get too much further, you mentioned hurling. And it's funny because like, okay, unless you live in Ireland, I'm sure it's like you see like this stick and you're hitting a ball. Like, I don't get it. But I heard, I had Kevin Mulcahy on the podcast a while ago who does a lot of sports performance and integration with sport itself. And he talks about just how chaotic hurling is. Like, I mean, I don't know how many rules there are in like the game of soccer or, football, like we kick the ball on the ground, right? There's not that many rules, but I think there's a lot more. And I don't know, I'd be curious what you learned out of playing that sport. Cause I like asking people about their movement background and how that, I think that has an interesting way of shaping our thought process as well.
What did I learn from playing those sports? I don't know. I wasn't very reflective when I was playing sports.
You just did it.
I think I didn't, I learn now that I know now about myself that I have pretty good hand-eye coordination, that I can pick up ball sports very, very easily. And I'm not the best athlete. I'm not someone who can sprint super fast or jump high. I can change direction pretty well. Like agility is pretty good. But when I'm put into a situation where I need to play basketball or some other ball sport, I won't be good at the skill of playing that sport, but I will be able to read your body movement very, very well. So I will be able to defend you pretty well or attack you pretty well, even if I'm not good at that sport. So yeah, I don't know if did that come from playing those sports. I'm not sure. There's not necessarily more rules in our sports. There's just more ways to do things.
Options. Maybe they are.
Yeah. Like there's just, with soccer, let's say, yeah, you kick the ball on the ground, you can head the ball. With hurling, there's just so much more going on. There's just the ball travels so much faster. It's just much more chaotic, and it's very exciting to watch, and it's very, very good for developing hand-eye coordination and skills like that. But on the flip side, a lot of our athletes don't run and jump very well. They're good athletes, but if you saw a lot of Gaelic footballers and hurlers running, for example, you would say, what the hell is this? They run very poorly. And I think that is because the more of you that you have to put a focus on the ball, especially when you're growing up, the less chance you maybe get to have some kind of intention on your mechanics. And I know that there is a huge argument, and these people are right, that when we're younger, we need to focus mostly on playing. Like playing a variety of sports is definitely the way to go with kids. But there is also definitely a time and a place. There's a reason why track athletes are the best runners, because they are running without worrying about a ball in their hands. They can focus on their running technique, or they just practice running more. And if you're always trying to run and the goal is always, I'm going to get to that ball, or I'm going to block this person, or I'm going to block that run, then maybe you don't develop some of those technical things in the same way. So yeah, I see a lot of people arguing for like it all should be play, and I think the most when we're kids, the most amount of it should be play. But there's definitely a time and a place for, let's put the ball away and let's do some sprints, and let's focus on one or two little things in our sprints. Let's do some jumps, and that was definitely missing from my development as a kid, and I think a lot of Irish people who played those sports missing from their developments as well.
It's interesting to think about. Well, one thing you said was like just the amount of options you have. Like, like maybe compared to a sport like American football that's often linked to track and field, and there's more free sprinting in the field potentially, versus I almost think like, all right, if you were playing like racquetball, basically moving racquetball, you would never have the opportunity or the affordance or whatever to run in a straight line that often where you could focus on just pure speed. So yeah, it's interesting to think about that. But I also think about almost how like people who are like strength or performance coaches for sports and they play the sport themselves that are very like a lot of options. I believe that they almost have a little bit different mentality versus a sport that has less options. And it's more like chess on the field. Like American football is a little bit more like chess on the field. There's a lot more, strategy that's predetermining the options of the play and things like that. So I'm just curious. I find myself curious just to see where people came from too, because I maybe it's just selfishly, I just think about that a lot myself now, and how that shapes my own thinking on things. So,
but I think you're probably looking at your kids now and wondering like what I actually did a podcast episode on this on my podcast, probably a couple of years ago, where I just talked. Most of my episodes are not good, by the way. I'm not making a plug. It's just me talking crap. But I was like, what are the best sports for kids to play? And I kind of came up with, it was more of a conversation with myself. I came up with actually potentially parkour could be good, or actually really good. I think track and field is very important. I think just having some time where you're sprinting and throwing is really, really good. Gymnastics is probably good for boys, especially to learn their flexibility early and maybe keep it. And then some ball sports are good, and maybe some martial arts, but I don't want people getting punched in the head too early. So maybe wrestling or jiu-jitsu or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. It's and going through that too, it gives you such a cool window with what happens later. I know you're going to be getting the opportunity for this, plenty here in the next 5 years. Your little one's 9 months now, so yeah, it's fun too to think too as well. Going back, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done that when I was a kid. Like I was just going rock climbing with my kids last night, and then, but then there's like this like gap where the mat is you can crash on, so they're always jumping over the mat. So they're trying to get a little both. They're doing parkour, jumping over the mat. I try to get my son, especially into like dynos, where you jump and try to grab on the holds, and so he's all into that. And so it's kind of like this, trying to make it as multifactorial, and kids just want to do that anyway. So it's definitely a blast.
Yep.
So David, one thing I wanted to ask you on the level of the feet and lower leg especially is you've posted this all the time. I have seen it where people get the shakes. It's almost like the barometer, right? And it's almost like when you're seeking that one thing and you find someone's legs start shaking. Tell me a little bit about that, like what you feel like, one, is going on, and then two, your process with that in terms of just basic lower leg, foot, and ankle type work.
Yeah. So, if people are ever on our Instagram page, they'll see people shaking a lot, and it's not you can basically elicit those shakes in anyone, right? You can put someone into an extreme isometric, which you've talked a lot about, Joel, and if they're 5 minutes in, they're going to be shaking. So it's not really that where it's just pure fatigue inducing. Okay, don't die in this position. It's more we're trying to find a position that one, potentially that they were injured in, or that they're avoiding, or that there's like, I think that there's tissues that are maybe not coming to the party, and we try and load them as early as we can, and give them no choice but to load. So it's a very positional thing. So a lot of the time that could be in a position where we are standing up, we're on one leg, we drop our knee forward, we maybe go into a B stance or a kickstand position. We go into a hip hinge basically on that front leg, and then we take their heel off the floor, just like a credit card distance or something like that. And we have their knee forward. So they're in something that I talk about as being a positive, or a lot of people say a positive shin angle. Their knee is forward, all their weight is forward, and that heel is off the floor. And some people just cannot hold that isometric contraction. You're basically asking in that instance for the foot intrinsic and extrinsic intrinsics and extrinsics to work with the plantar flexors and the dorsiflexors. There needs to be a co-contraction of the entire lower leg, and you'll see people just completely there's a muscular tremor, or muscular tremors, or I think the correct term is fasciculations are occurring, and it's an inefficiency, I think, of the nervous system to just coordinate that pattern, to hold an isometric. And you will see this in a lot of isometrics. You're asking someone to hold an isometric contraction, and they have an inability to do so. And you'll see that this tremor starts to occur, and you have to wonder if this is, and this isn't like, I'm not putting 200 kilos on their back. It's a body weight movement, and these are great athletes that we're doing this with. So they should be able to just hold this position for 15, 20, 30 seconds. And a lot of these instances, they're not. And this is despite them doing rehab sometimes elsewhere, where they're doing really heavy calf raises and, isolated movements. But this is a more intermuscular coordination type of thing, where there's groups of muscles working together. And you do have to wonder that if you're sending people back to sport where these inefficiencies are still there, you won't see those inefficiencies when they go and sprint and jump. You're not going to see a tremor when they sprint and jump. Certainly not at full speed anyway. But what is happening under the hood is this inability for these muscles to coordinate together. And I think that's a huge issue that we need to make sure is not there, basically. So usually yielding isometrics are very good at getting that out. And also, overcoming isometrics can be quite good too. You won't see as much of the tremor, maybe. Actually, I do have some videos of some people who are like, I'm doing a overcoming iso push up into a barbell, and the guy's leg just freaks out instantly. And I think that's just, we're trying to call on certain muscle fibers that have maybe been hiding, or there's a bit of inhibition there. You're basically trying to break through that inhibition instantly and ask them to produce a lot of force very quickly. And those tissues are not capable or maybe not happy to do that. So I think yielding and overcoming isometrics, typically yielding isometrics are a good way to bring that out, train it. And the good thing is it's a coordinated pattern, so it will improve pretty quickly. And I've had a lot of people that have weird types of pain, shin pain, Achilles pain, calf pain, different types of pain where it goes away pretty quickly. So I wouldn't hang my hat on it. I wouldn't bank on it, but it goes away pretty quickly when those tremors start to go away. And I can't explain, I don't have a perfect explanation for that, but I just know that it shouldn't be there. And we'll train it, we'll make it stronger, and we'll get rid of it, and we'll just progress on. Maybe it get a lot better, maybe it'll get a little better, but it shouldn't be there.
Yeah. It seems like, if you're looking at what order of business to go about with somebody, it would seem like that's probably one of the first things you should seek, because no matter what position your joint's in or anything else, if you don't have that connection, that neural connection, it seems like that could by itself, finding where that fasciculation occurs, that angle, and just strengthening it could do so much. If you have like a linchpin, right, where you pull the pin and it sets off the chain.
100%. I 100%. I think that's so important. And I think the more I go on, the more I start to consider the role that inhibition is playing, where, like, again, for someone, a good example is someone that has a patellar tendinopathy. They try and do a quad exercise and all they feel is their tendon. Or someone that's had an ACL surgery, their quad muscles have wasted away. And they're trying to get their quad, I don't love the word firing, but it's probably a decent word in this instance. They're trying to get their quad firing again, and they can't. And if you think about, like, almost, I think about this logically, if your brain or your nervous system was logical, it would say, you have knee pain, I have knee pain. Why don't I use my quad more so that I have less knee pain? But it does the opposite. It's, I have knee pain, I'm going to use my quad less. And then when you do a knee exercise, I feel my knee more. As a logical person, I'm like, that nervous system, like, what are you doing? Just stop doing that. But there's so much pain brings along so much inhibition that I think getting rid of that inhibition should be the first order of sequence. Getting a really strong, clean muscle or group of muscles contracting together, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, without question. And sometimes I think about, well, what's my own first order with a lot of things? And I like Jay Schrader's stuff, where it's like these isometric yielding holds, long time, and they're pretty much all with a lot of 90-degree joint angles. So you don't necessarily get like a propulsion piece, like, where the knee's going over the toe, but it seemed like so much was based on that. And then they'd use like electrostimulation to get muscles firing. And it's like, well, if you can just put someone in ISO and get their muscles firing, that's going to go a long way. So I'm glad you mentioned too, the version of the fasciculation that you can get when it's like a fatigue. Like I think about, like, if you hold a wall sit and your heels are off the ground and you hold it long enough, it almost doesn't matter who you are. Eventually you're going to just start seeing those heels go, but it's interesting there, because I've had clients who, it's like when you move away from like pain or injury and you just put someone in the right spot and all of a sudden their system can't tolerate it. You get a healthy athlete or relatively healthy. And I almost find that it's like the ability to shake once you're under fatigue is almost a sign of a good nervous system readiness. Cause it's like, the nervous system is so ready to step in and adjust the firing pattern when it's like a long duration, because it knows things are flipped out. So it's just interesting, the contrast between those two. I think it's almost two situations that we should try to seek no matter who we're training. Can I get you to shake in a poor pattern that you've had on a short period of time with not much load? And then on the other hand, can we do a longer hold, and what happens here? It's just different. It's just interesting either way.
Yeah, well, when you see the shake, you know something is happening. And look, honestly, I'm not chasing the shake as such when I train clients. Like, sometimes when I put up those videos, I get comments like, "How I tried that and I didn't get. How do I get to shake to happen?" I'm like, I'm not trying to get the shake to happen. I'm training a particular movement with that person in question because I think they need to work on that movement and they need to be stronger here, and they're avoiding this position or whatever. And the shake happens as a result of that. It's not like if you didn't get the shake to happen, you need to find a better way of shaking, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just an interesting thing that I go back to all of the time. I've to and fro so much over the years on how much I love isometrics or don't love isometrics and stuff. And actually, at the moment, I'm in the camp of isometrics are so great. They're so amazing. They're so helpful for decreasing inhibition, for finding safe positions, especially in rehab. You can find it's not that like there's this kind of argument sometimes online now about, oh, isometrics aren't the magic thing. It was, if you want to improve tendon health, then you can do slow, heavy eccentrics, concentrics, isometrics, and so on. It's not that isometrics are amazing. It's not that isometrics are amazing, but they are an amazing start point because you can find a position that someone is comfortable in. You can push them really hard in that position, and it's very easy for them to replicate on their own. It's very easy to measure their improvements there in terms of load or time or things like that. So it's not that they're the magic exercise, but they are or the magic thing to use, but they are so helpful to have. And yeah, the more I go on, I thought I would use less, and I'm using them more and more.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'm also glad you said too, like not chasing fasciculations or the shaking. It reminds me of in my mind it was like Pareto's law, but like no, that's the 80-20. It's Parkinson's law. It's like if you chase an end, eventually that becomes a negative. If it's like I'm chasing this thing too far, and so yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. But I would agree. The longer I've gone through training, and especially with isometrics, you realize it's kind of funny because the way I think of it, the body it's always evolving, always adapting, always working on a very high level. And just because there's no movement doesn't mean there's not a lot of richness in the movement. It's just now happening underneath the hood, so to speak. It could be happening in muscle fibers cycling in and out. Some get tired, some jump in. There's that tendon that's creeping and lengthening. Like just because it's almost like you have to freeze all the external movement to have more of a richness in the internal place. And there's also like this cool patience and slowness of it that sits at this perfect offset balance with all the fast stuff that's happening on the outside too.
Yep. And the sensory aspect of being able to feel the position. Yes, you might access that position when you play sport, but you're always moving through it. So what about staying here for a while? How does that feel for you? What if we just move you a couple of degrees this way or a millimeter that way? How does that feel for you? And I think it's a really nice place to explore micro movements from, and you start to bring tissue to the party that might otherwise be very sneaky and hiding for some reason.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. That you saying that makes me think of Keith Barr. And then I just saw some research that I think was posted on this or some sort of more formal paper talking about the longer you hold an isometric, it's almost like you have the superficial core of the tendon. And the longer you hold it, the more you get to that like little inner donut or something like that. So it's like a patience thing too, that I think is valuable, but you can't see it. It's just something happening beneath the surface. And I think that's part of the magic of the whole thing, really. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, David, I saw some videos you had posted with this as well. The overcoming ISO work, like similar to, or is, I'm sure based off like Alex Natera's run specific ISOs where he'd have someone in a rack and a force plate. I think you just had weight to push, like that's all I've had ever done is like the rigged up version where you have you put as much weights on and try to lift it. I think Christian Thibodeau talked about that, like functional isometrics. Actually, I lied. I just got like a Tindec, like a little like climbing force meter now that I rig up now, which is really cool. But that's what I had done for so long. Anyways, I was just curious what you've been doing along the lines of, those overcoming more functional or run specific based ISOs.
Yep. So there's probably, I think Alex Natera has done brilliant work on that. I play around with it a little bit. I think he's super specific with his kind of 2 or 3 positions that he uses, and I think that makes sense in a testing environment where you're trying to replicate the exact position all of the time so that we can test it and measure it against each other. In a training environment, I don't think you have to be as perfect with this is the exact joint angle that you use. I think you just want to be close enough that you can replicate it. So yeah, I don't have a Smith machine in the gym at the moment. It's actually probably the next piece of equipment that I will be getting. I have 2 racks in our gym. It's a rehab facility, so we really only ever have 1 athlete or 2 athletes in there at a time. And I got 2 racks when I first was designing it, and I really wish I got one rack and one Smith machine so that it's such a valuable piece of equipment to have. Um, I use a couple. I use an overcoming isometric where we do bent knee position under the bar, a little bit of knee bend, and I use a heel slightly off the floor if I'm trying to target the lower leg and the foot and the ankle a little bit more. So we push straight up into the barbell with the heel slightly off. I will keep the heel down if I'm trying to get a little bit more of the knee joint there, and that one I will use where if we have someone that has a patellofemoral pain who is maybe a fat pad problem who is intolerant to knee extension. So some people, very clear now, this is not a patellar tendon. Some people, even you ask them to squeeze their quad, to contract their quad in a standing position, and they will say that they feel knee pain under the kneecap or behind the kneecap, even in just with no load. They're just standing there, they squeeze their quad. And they might also feel it in a leg extension as they come up into that straight knee position. So for someone like that, I will usually avoid the top 15 to 30 degrees of or the first 15 to 30 degrees of knee flexion, I should say, in an open chain movement. And then what I might start to do is go into a knee iso push under the barbell. So I will train deeper ranges of knee flexion in split squats and stuff like that. But I won't go into the top, and I might go into under a barbell then and use a knee iso push so that we can get in the closed chain. They'll probably be okay, and we'll just push straight up into the barbell, and they'll start to get some strength in that more knee extended position. So that's an example of where I would use the heel down versus if I'm trying to get more foot or ankle, I would take the heel off the floor ever so slightly, still with the knee a little bit bent. I don't really like to do them with the knee straight. At least not with the knee straight where I'm in a pretty plantar flex position. I just don't think you have much push from there. I think you should be in more of a dorsiflex position to get a push. The other one that I use is the lateral one into the wall. So if you're on your right leg, let's say you put your left shoulder in against the wall, your right foot it's almost like you're trying to replicate a change of direction position. You'll see Jonas Dodo doing quite a bit of this type of work, change direction type of work. So I like to get into a nice deep positive shin angle there, leaning against the wall, and we get the people to push as hard as possible, laterally as hard as possible. And usually we're doing that with like knees and ankle sprains, knee problems, stuff like that. We might take the heel off the floor ever so slightly there, and we're just trying to get them used to pushing not just vertically or horizontally, but this kind of lateral push as well. So that would be an overcoming one, and we keep it quite simple, sets and reps. I go for like 4 to 6 sets of 5 reps, and each rep is a 3 to 5 second push, maximal push. And I think, like Alex has kind of spoken about there, you really have to scream at people to get that max output. I think it's actually, especially in my world, in the rehab world, people will not give you their all. They're holding back either because they're purposefully holding back or they're subconsciously holding back, but they really will not give you their all. So you really have to scream at them. And it's quite nice to allow them to do their other leg as well, the unaffected legs, so that they can feel what 100% push feels like. And then I'd be like, were you really giving me everything on your other side? And no, the answer is usually no. And max effort is a skill in training. Like learning to train to failure, if you're lifting weights, it's a big skill. It's a huge skill that people need to learn, and that's even more of a skill in rehab, is getting people to push to failure. And in our max effort pushes, then separate to training to failure, but are just 100% max effort work. That's a huge skill that you need to teach people. Intensity basically is a skill, and is a huge skill that I think is missing in rehab. I think it's people in rehab will add in more and more volume and more complexity to avoid the one thing that they need, which is intensity. And that's intensity in their lifts, intensity in their isometrics, intensity in their sprints, their decelerations, their jumps, their change of direction. They need way more intensity. I see people going through we get people who've gone through full ACL process and they've been cleared for sport, or we get people that are professional basketballers that are cleared to return to sport after an ankle surgery or something like that, and they feel like they're not ready. And they come to us and I ask them to show me your program and tell me what you've been working on. And there's no intensity in that program. It's always, let's add in more sets, more reps, more exercises, and intensity is almost always the missing ingredient.
At justflysports.com, I have one last sale going on before the year closes. Until January 1st of 2025, you can get Speed ID, my new mini course, as well as Sprint Acceleration Essentials as a combo pack, the Super Speed Combo, saving $60 on the 2 courses. Head to justflysports.com to take advantage of this offer and grab these 2 highly reviewed courses today or before January 1st. Yeah. I think it was you that mentioned the idea of, or the phrase at least, because I like this phrase, sensory to intensity. And I do like that thought of, like, if someone's talking about complex programs or complex exercises, sure, use them. But just so you know, this is where it's going, is you have to have that intense burst on the day, and that has to be maximal. And yeah, like you said, I think even of, like akin to sprinting itself, a very simple thing, but we're a product of our environment. And I think it was a recent podcast. It may have been me talking to Rob Assis or Chris Corfist, but I think they had a timing system where like the times were flashing up on a board or something like that, or at least a large enough screen where people could see it. And it's just interesting to think of how we're a product of our environment. And just like, so I remember, when I was in grad school, I was in the biomechanics lab, and we would do just this. To me, it seems so old school, like muscle EMG testing. We'd strap, electrodes on people's muscles, and you'd have to yell at them so that they contracted hard enough in the EMG. But even having something to look at, like doing the iso pushes, if you don't yell at somebody, if they have someone to look at too, and they see the little force meter going up, versus if they don't, or imagine doing like a Kaiser jumper and you have no idea what your wattage is every time. We are so a product of our environment in that way, but it's cool because that gives us license to keep the method so simple because the environment can shape it. And so it's just like always, it's good to hear that theme in rehab as well as, the main.
No, it's huge. I think it's more important in rehab.
Yeah.
Because that it's missing so much. In S&C, you usually have someone that's already playing their sport.
Yeah.
So they're already getting exposure, probably to some level of intensity, or they're already on the field, or they're competing. You're not on the field if you're not trying to win that ball, and that brings intensity out of you. So in rehab, that's missing, and usually the competition element is missing as well, because you're here with me. It's just me and you in the gym, or you're not with your team environment. So I think this is where getting people back to just doing things with their team as early as possible is so important. And it doesn't have to, it's obviously not them playing the full sport, but just even going shooting around with the team or something, you just get that good feeling again, and that will amplify how much intensity they do bring to their rehab sessions. In the last month, I think we've had 2 professional basketballers visit us in Ireland and spend a week with us, and like both times I have brought the athlete to the basketball court with me, they were ready to do a little bit again, and we played some one-on-ones and stuff. And I cannot play basketball. I cannot shoot, I cannot do anything, but I'm just like, come on, like, beat me, just so you can feel those movements again. And a big part of, we were doing 2 a days. One we're doing basketball in the morning, gym in the afternoon, and the basketball session, they're just getting so much of the nice movement that they want. They have a smile on their face, and maybe you'll do some, instead of doing our strict plyometrics, maybe we just play that basketball session at 75%, and then we finish with 10. You try and dunk the ball 10 times or something like that. And like that, they basically just had the best session that they've had in 6 months, because they just got a little bit of competition again, which was missing. So it's intensity and competition, both missing in rehab, hugely, and it's a huge problem, humongous problem.
Yeah. To link that, I was going to say too, Well, one, I was going to ask you if you ever have the basketball players try hurling. You know, you can bust out the little hurling stick. And...
In our gym, we do. We have the hurleys in the gym, so they can all have a little play. But yeah, they're usually not too bad. I have to say, they're used to using their hands a lot, so yeah, they're not bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never played. I'm interested. I watch it. I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I think it would take me. I'm the type of like the way my attention goes. It would take me a long time to figure out what was going on. but it's such an intriguing game to me. I do want to say, yeah, with the intensity, it does make sense. I like the thought. Tommy John had said this, but the stimulus to heal needs to be greater than whatever hurts you. And the thought of like, okay, well, if I'm going to heal this thing, then I need to really be bringing that. And it's also, once you are healthy, there's always that sympathetic parasympathetic balance. You actually almost can't dig in quite as hard in some respects, because if you do, you overstrain and things like that. So it's an interesting thought to think about that for rehab. And I totally agree with you with just that intensity, and even just, like appropriate level of play too, to facilitate that. I think it goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I looked at a couple of my programs that I wrote for people, for a couple of hamstring people a couple of years ago. I looked at them recently, and we do a lot of drilling work early in hamstring rehab, not because I think drills are amazing or anything like that, but they're really good for rehab because you're keeping a similar pattern of cycling the leg or whatever, and the hamstring is moving through similar lengths, just at less force and less velocity. So I think drills are perfect for rehab. And you keep the foot strike and these different things. But what I looked at was, okay, we had started like dribbles and skips and stuff, 4 or 5 days after someone had whatever type of hamstring injury it was. And we kept them in and we upped the intensity as we went along. But then I looked at like their last stage of the rehab program that I've had written for them, which is, 10 days before they return to full training. And I just added in more and more and more drills. And I was like, okay, and there's like 3 sprints at the end or something like that. And now, so I was just filling the session up with more and more things that, I don't know, was I justifying my job, or was it just more complexity, more volume? And it was probably because I was afraid of just giving them more intensity. So I just add in more of everything else instead and fill up that program. So yeah, when I looked at that, and those hamstring people were fine. They did okay. But if I was critiquing someone else's program now that had written that exact thing, I would say, where is the sprinting here? Where is the hard accelerations, hard decelerations? There's not enough of that. And I was definitely not doing enough of that a couple of years ago. I was protecting myself, but and that's a huge thing in rehab. We do not want to hurt the person again. Obviously, you do not want to hurt the person again, but all you're doing is kicking the can down the road, because they will get hurt when they return to sport if they don't get hurt with you in rehab, because you haven't actually given them that intensity. So that's been my huge lesson, which sounds so obvious. I know it does. People listening are probably like, duh, but yeah. Yeah, duh is right. I was missing it, but I think in rehab it's missed most of the time, to be honest.
Yeah. I've seen people come off of Achilles issues, so they were cleared from the training room, and then for day one go to track practice. This is when I was a strength coach and just kind of observing, basically. And I would just see the person go out to track, and then a week later they're back in the training room again. And I'm just like, this is crazy. This is blowing my mind that that's okay, I guess, or the way that was seen to be okay. So yeah, I and just the play and the dynamic piece just makes it so much more fun, in my opinion, too, because it's like, it's more alive, and there's something that's just, you're constantly feeding that in. I wanted to ask you about the ISO, I guess ISO calf push, but I've seen, I think it's in one of your programs, because I use this. So a big core movement that I use with a lot of clients is the Jay Schrader movement. I mean, it's so basic. It's just stand on one leg and then put the other leg in max hip flexion, just stand there. And then a lot of times after that, you'll go do calf raises, like a combo. But I've seen one of your programs, I don't know if it was lower body basics or whatnot, but it's like the same thing, but it's with a bent knee, like slightly bent. and then the foot's in dorsiflexion instead. And so usually I use the regular one, but sometimes I'll use the bent knee version, especially if people need more dorsiflexion or whatever it is. But that's so interesting what you said about the like doing a max push from more of a bent or a deleveraged position of the calf, just because I know for me, when I do a max iso push, a lot of times it almost feels like if my calf is at a 90, like a natural 90, or my ankle, sorry, not my calf. I don't know how my calf's going to do a 90. It's more of a spiral and whatever. Like,
so if you have a vertical shin,
like,
is what you're saying.
Yeah, vertical shin, or what happens is I will lever my shin slightly forward, but my heel comes up with it. So the ankle maintains the 90. And that's such a strong angle. What I find then is as long as the ankle is good, like the foot's good, there's no main issues, the tendon's strong enough, is that whatever score I get in that push is a lot driven by just how good my nervous system is to do everything else. You know, what subtle hip, subtle knee, shoulders even kind of digging in, whatever it is, spine and ribs, just because and the foot is getting that stimulus for sure. But you got me thinking now, if you put that foot in a deleveraged position, you're probably going to feel like your calf's about to rip. And again, that's not the exact same position that in a lot of sport and speed and propulsion, you do want to maintain that 90 or get to it as soon as you can because that's propulsive. You don't want to push in a sprint with the heel near the ground. But it's interesting to think about. So I was just thinking about what you said there with that deleverage version, that I'm sure the calf is going to work way harder and the Achilles also longer. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting for you to try you can still have the straight knee if you like, or the bent knee, but the one where you're taking the heel off the floor, but start with your forefoot on the edge of a step or a plate or something like that. So you're starting from a more dorsiflex position and then pushing from there, because your calf is much stronger from a more dorsiflex position, and that's why I guess in our regular calf raises or I think this leads me onto a slightly separate topic, but I think a huge mistake, you asked me with Achilles stuff earlier, a huge mistake that I think people make when they're trying to do calf strength work for the Achilles, which is generally a pretty good idea, is they underload their calf raises for the simple reason that they're trying to complete the full movement. So they're trying to go from a negative position or a dorsiflex position where their heel is, they're off the edge of a step, they touch their heel on the floor or something, and then they try and get up into full plantar flexion. And actually, you're way, way, way weaker in full plantar flexion at your calves than you are in dorsiflexion. So what a lot of people are doing is saying to me, I've been doing calf raises for years and my Achilles problem hasn't gone away. And actually, I see what they're doing, and they're just underloading it, hugely underloading it, because they're trying to complete the full rep rather than loading the crap out of the barbell as heavy as possible and being happy that you can only move from your fully dorsiflexed or close to your fully dorsiflexed position with a straight knee, I'm talking about here, and it's just a regular standing straight knee calf raise, to just above neutral. That's where you want to be loading your calf raises up. Don't worry about the full plantar flex position. Yes, you might need to train that separately. With one of our pro basketballers, an Achilles rupture guy, we do all of his heavy calf raise work. We don't worry about that full plantar flex position, despite him and every other Achilles rupture being really weak in the full plantar flex position. They will really struggle there. But we don't worry about trying to train that in the same movement. We load it up as heavy as possible. We do 2 up, 1 down, where he does 5-second eccentrics off the edge of a step. He can't get anywhere near full plantar flexion. But if you try and load it only to a point where you can complete the full rep, you're going to leave the bottom portion significantly underloaded. And that's where you're going to get the biggest changes in muscle strength and tendon stiffness. So it's really important. I think it's a really important message for me to put out there, is load your calf raises heavier. Don't worry if people aren't getting to the top. Train the top range in a separate movement. For that guy, he's doing his eccentric work, 2 up, 1 down, 4 sets of 5-second eccentrics. And then after he's done with that, he does 3 sets of 60 pulses where he pulses the top. We put a wedge we put a wedge or a step under his heel, and he just bounces off he's just bouncing through the top half of the motion, and he does 60 reps there just to milk out the top range. But all the strength and the tendon gains come from being super heavy through the bottom half of the range.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that because I saw a video. You just described it. Yeah, someone basically just pulsing through the top, and there's like a plate so that your heel couldn't drop a certain point. And so, yeah, I like the idea of just polarizing exercises. Again, simply, like it's a way that drives intensity. But it's like, all right, if you're going to do a calf raise, don't let the top range limit the stimulus, and then conversely, you can get that. It kind of reminds me, there's this old jump program called Air Alert. I mean, I think they still sell it. And it got a lot of flack because it's like the only way of progression was up. Like you start with like 20 squat jumps, and then week 2, it's like 30, and then it's 50, and then it's 80. And by the time you get to 80, it's just like, my quads are going to explode. I don't think I'm training power anymore, but you just keep going, and I think it was kind of funny, but they, one of the exercises in there was called burnouts, and you just got up on your tippy toes basically and just kind of bounced up and down your tippy toes for however long. And it's just funny because I think that people would look at a program like that and think, oh, it's just a dumb program, because they would only look at the progression. You did it every day, by the way. You did calf raises, you did these squat jumps, you did these bench step up jumps, you did those burnouts. I'm missing one other one, but just like ankle hops, like pogos. You did those 5. And I think they added like a low squat jump in there later at some point. But you did those every day, and the numbers just got into insanity. But the thing is a lot of people until insanity were gaining. Like they were gaining vertical on that. Like, so you can't, I mean, even me, like I gained 2 or 3 inches in about 3 weeks. And of course you're going to run out. But I just think I find it interesting to go back to that program and look at it from different eyes. Like, hey, maybe burnouts had some value. That seems cool. And you're doing like single leg burnouts, basically. It's a little more specific. So I think it's just interesting to go back and look at those things.
A lot of people will improve with a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
it's cool. Yeah, but predictable and repeatable. You could probably get more predictable, more repeatable results doing other things, but. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that doesn't work. It still probably works for a lot of people. Yeah.
It almost, to me, would be interesting to go back and give that program to people and be like, okay, at what point you track their vertical and you see how many weeks into it till they stall. It'd be interesting to see, oh man, you made it to week 10 and you still improved. You did 150 squat jumps, like, wow, like good for you, like whereas the real fast twitch person probably like week 2, I'm done. Like give me something more powerful and not every day. So
have you ever seen it's kind of off topic, but there's an Asian guy on Instagram and TikTok. He has a huge following and all he does is jump. I'll have to send you his link afterwards, whatever. But he doesn't, I don't think he speaks English, but he jumps in his living room with like weights in his hand and he just pops it up like 5 kilos. Jump. Yeah. Can I jump over this brush or whatever?
Yeah, it's always like the one level 1, 2, 3, right? Like
Yeah. And the comments, you ever look at the comments, it's hilarious because the comments are like, always like, this guy is an amazing jumper. And he is an amazing jumper, right? He does horizontal, vertical, everything. He's amazing. But the comments are like, bro, show me your program or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, he's showing you his program.
Yeah.
He just fucking jumps in every way possible with no rhyme or reason. That's his program and it works.
Yeah. And he's loving it too. There's like a joy.
He
absolutely loves it. That's something that's so understated for sure. I think that's a huge lesson to learn just by watching that. Be like, how much fun can you have coming up with these challenges? That's a huge part of it all. So to close this out, David, I wanted to ask you this as well. I just think that link, like you talked about, like the bridge between or intensity and rehab and performance, and I think when you go into rehab programs, I think with the foot and ankle, it is a little bit, it is a complex structure. Let's just say that it's an intricate, amazing structure. But one of the things, this was a podcast I did with Roman, I butcher his last name, Turulion. He had some different methods of like elevating the toes or elevating the little toes or the big toe. And anyways, in doing some work with toe elevation on a slant board, like you're facing the slant board, so it's very propulsive. Man, I was like, man, you can get some really gnarly intrinsic foot just strength that you really feel. And so I'm like, okay, well, it could be great in rehab, but you could also use this in mainline performance training. And so I wanted to ask you if there's any feedback you've gotten or in the late stages of rehab or any thoughts you have on some of the concepts that you have worked with and seen that you feel like this would go beyond rehab? Like this would just be good to do for injury prevention. This would just be good to do for foot and ankle performance and those elements. So yeah, curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think I always put the lens of rehab on it because that's what I do. But I think if I was training someone to move better, run faster, jump higher, I would do most of the same stuff. I would do the same. I would do all of the same stuff. I would just be less cautious with how to progress people. I would just be more aggressive, and I'm already very aggressive in rehab. I would do this. I just think this is good training, to be honest. And yeah, and you know what? We've had a lot of feedback from a lot of athletes who we rehab them and they just ask us to keep training them, and we do that for years, and they keep getting better and they stop getting injured so much. Some people are really good at getting injured, but so we can't be too hard on ourselves, but in general as an industry, but yeah, I just think it's really good training, and it shouldn't be that weird that doing some foot stuff is good training, like including that. It is good training. And you'll be surprised. You see some amazing athletes who they come into the gym and you ask them to do certain things and they struggle. And there's two arguments. You can go two ways with that. Some people might say, well, they're really good athletes and they struggle, so that means that this isn't important because they struggle with that. So, and they're already a good athlete. But same athlete has issues. That's a bad mindset. Everyone can get better. Obviously, we want to make sure that they're getting better at the right things. But there's so much that we can do that's not usually included in your generic S&C program. And all of this whole topic is, I'm reminded of a tweet that I saw from someone one day. I think it was on one of Mike Boyle's tweets. He actually tagged me in a tweet and he said, oh, we saw some of David's stuff and he was taking the heel off the floor and we're starting to incorporate that. And someone commented saying, why do you do that? The weight room is not for that. That's like trying to get someone to slide tackle, a soccer player to slide tackle someone while they're doing a squat or something. It was like, save the heels off for outside of the weight room. And I was just like, you just compared training your foot to trying to slide tackle someone with a barbell on your back. Like it was so foreign for him to think about actually training the feet in some kind of a different way. So yeah, I think, and you know what? It's actually pretty easy. You don't always have to take the shoes off. You don't always have to go into the super deep pronation, supination stuff that we've spoken about before. And I think maybe we've spoken about on podcasts before. You can do that, but you don't have to. Even just doing some of the overcoming isometrics where the heel is off the floor a little bit. We use it with all our healthy athletes. It works really well. Doing Bulgarian split squats where you take the front heel off the floor a tiny, tiny bit. Do you sacrifice stability? I don't know, maybe a tiny bit, but not a lot. And you still get so much. You can still load the crap out of that. You can still do Hatfield split squats where you take that front heel a tiny bit off the floor. It shouldn't be the only thing you do. It's not a panacea. It's not going to change your life. But also, what's the harm in strengthening it? The same coaches that say taking the heel off is a waste of time, or don't do that. The gym is just about force production. Will do mobility drills with their athletes before they warm up. They will do towel grabbing exercises with their athletes, or building your arch exercises with your athletes. What I would say is most of that stuff is crap. And you can get all of the benefits from the foot intrinsics and foot extrinsic muscles from taking your heels off more in just more exercises, and just have that incorporated with the full lift, rather than trying to isolate out these things. Or they'll do big toe lifts and stuff. So there's so much you can do. You just need to explore, and you would be surprised. You will find some big weak links in a lot of people. And and you know what else? Athletes will really like it. It feels good for them. They like that feeling of being on the front or the middle of their foot. They really like that feeling.
Yeah. If you're an athlete, you should be able to do, especially we talked about ISOs, you should be able to do an ISO lunge. And at some point, get your heel, like you said, just a credit card. I've seen those done where like the heel's way off the ground and now it's not really the same foot action, but like you should be able to do that. And then too, like I love it's like if you're in the weight room, you should understand yielding and you should understand propulsion. Very simple values. And like that kickstand RDL, like you had a video of it and that guy's like calf starts shaking like crazy. Like even if you don't have an injury or an issue, if you have a group of athletes and they do something like that and they're got 3 people whose calves are like lighting up, there probably could be that's a weak link that a lot of gains are on the table just by shoring that up. And that's the thing. Actually, I saw that video. I'm like, that's the thing I need to get working in a little bit more, just because I love that neutral place of isos, and it's a great place. But there's also like, hey, how could we explore propulsion? And I think that's a really cool way to start exploring propulsion a little bit more specifically too. So it's a cool thing. Yeah, I agree. Same. And I'm going to steal that that bottom half or 2/3 calf raise plus the little single leg burnouts. I'm going to try that. So real cool stuff, David. Well, hey, thank you so much, man. I know we could have talked about a lot more, but it was great to reconnect. I know it's been a while. And yeah, good luck. I know you got the new gym, the little one. So, best of luck to you with all that stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have coming out here in the future. And thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Joel. Always a pleasure. You're the man, so keep it up. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.